involved. I'm delighted to welcome, and I've seen him at 5 a.m. in the morning. He looks fantastic. Albie Amankona, how are you?
I'm very well, Jeremy. How are you?
You look like one of those professional broadcasters. I noticed this morning that you were eating peanuts. That's, you know, I'm onto the sausage sandwich, and you're sitting there eating peanuts.
Well, I'm going to Greece next week, Jeremy. So I've got to, you know, make sure I don't get too fat before.
I don't think there's any chance of that. Dave, you're not going to Greece, are you? Right, Albie, listen, thank you so much for joining us this morning. So much that I know you want to talk about. Let's talk about the obvious thing that's in the newspapers. 126 fines later, 1.4 million quid. Use Boris Johnson and his wife no more fines. A lot of people with opinions. Where do you stand on Partygate? Are we done? Is it time for the Tories to get back to governing the country, or what?
So first of all, I think it was £460,000, so a little bit different from £1.4 million, but nonetheless still a lot of money. Look, I think what's happened with Partygate, my opinion is that the Prime Minister has probably survived Partygate. I think the biggest danger point really was whether or not he received any more fixed penalty notices. You had a lot of people saying if there were any more notices, they might put their letters into the 1922 committee. That has not come to pass. Of course, there's still the Sue Gray report, which is set to come out earlier on next week, and there might be some pretty damning pictures in that report. And pictures tend to trigger the public's imagination quite a lot. So it's something particularly bad, that could be dangerous. But actually, on a technical point, what could actually be even more dangerous is this investigation that the Privileges Committee is doing. Because if the Privileges Committee finds that he's misled Parliament, then the logical outcome is he could be dismissed from Parliament. I'm
not sure how you can prove he misled Parliament. I'm not quite sure that he says that he doesn't know. I don't mean to be disrespectful. I'm not sticking up for him. I understand the people who will say, and I quote, he made the rules and he broke them. We still have, of course, the Keir Starmer situation in Durham. But for me, I just think it is time to move on. Absolutely judge Boris Johnson at the next election, as the electorate will, and if they haven't forgiven or forgotten, he will go. But I just think there's more important things to concentrate on right now.
Yes, I think it is time to move on, but that investigation will happen regardless of whether or not you and I think it's time to move on. And that is for the Privileges Committee to conclude, and I'm sure they will do that work, and they will come to a conclusion. But I do think it is time now for politics and for commentators and the public discourse to move on. He did break the law. He's the first Prime Minister in history to have received a criminal sanction. That is a very serious thing, and he will be judged on that in the next general election. But I think before that general election, it's time for him to focus on delivering on the manifesto pledges he made in 2019, many of which have been broken.
Well, interestingly, and that's the point, we'll talk after the break more, but interestingly, so many Tories, so many Conservative supporters contact this radio station and TV station and say the following: we voted for a Tory, we didn't vote for a green agenda, we didn't vote for borrowing money we don't have, we voted for tax cuts. You need to get back to what you do, or what you promised us that you would do, Boris. So I actually think, whether or not you have a view about Partygate, I think he will be judged massively in the next 6 to 12 months because of what's going on in the country. Just very briefly, Albie, Starmer, of course, still awaiting his fate from Durham. Stronger position? Not really, in my opinion. I haven't heard anything political. He spent months slagging off the Prime Minister and saying resign. I want to hear what the Labour Party will do, don't you?
I think there were repeated calls last night from Keir Starmer and the Labour Party for the Prime Minister to stand down, sounding a little bit like a broken record. I think after he's only been given one fine for arguably what was a pretty mild breach of the laws with this COVID cake situation, I think Keir Starmer's position on this is weaker. I think it was weakened even more by his own Beergate allegations, which of course come to light more recently. So him spending the last 4 months really hammering on Partygate, how much has it done for the Labour Party? Well, they're still ahead of us in the polls, Jeremy.
But I mean, I don't mean to be rude. Would you not imagine that the Labour Party, with the number of own goals, the number of mistakes and the number of problems, would be out of sight in the opinion, not 6 points in front? I think it's a very fascinating time. Listen, you're waking up on Friday morning. This is Talk TV Breakfast. Thank you for tuning in. Good morning, my friends. Welcome back. This is JK on Breakfast, almost 7:15, Friday the 20th of May. We're here with Albie. How are you? Amankona, you all right?
Yes, very well.
Political commentator and founder of Conservatives Against Racism. Delighted to have you on this morning. Listen, so much to talk about. One of the stories that absolutely just gathered pace yesterday and wouldn't go away was Andy Cook, that policeman who said, and I quote, Yes, and I agree. He says police men and women should be able to use discretion. But basically what he said was, because of the cost of living crisis, the very poor, maybe the police should turn a blind eye if they're caught stealing food, because it's very difficult. I mean, I was so strong on this, and please tell me you agree. What message does that send to families on the breadline who are scrimping and saving but don't break the law because we live in a civilised society? What does that say to shopkeepers, security guards? I just thought it was unbelievable, Albie.
I think it was a pretty surprising comment to come from this gentleman. I mean, I think the whole way that the law works in this country, which is why people are so upset about Partygate, is it works under the principle of equality under the law. The law is applied equally to everyone, whether or not you are the Prime Minister or whether or not you are someone who is suffering really badly on the breadline as a result of the cost of living crisis. And we can't have a situation where the law is applied more liberally to people because policemen and women rather feel sorry for them. I get discretion, and I know that the Bobby on the beat from 30 years ago would maybe you get a clip round the ear. You can't do that anymore because somebody will complain to the European Court or something. But we're talking about, we're vindicating, go and break law. Totally unacceptable. It is totally unacceptable. But also we also do have to understand that this is these people are in a place of desperation.
And they shouldn't break the law.
They shouldn't break the law.
Maybe the government should spend more money on food banks or stuff like that.
Potentially that's an option, but I think it's also a sign of the time that actually how difficult it is for a lot of people. That doesn't mean we should be making it easier for people to steal from shops. Perhaps we should be making it easier for people to have jobs, earn money and buy food from the shops so they're not having to resort to crime in order to survive. So many good stories,
when I say, and that was that one. The other one that sort of jumped out this week, doctors. I know they were, there was a story this morning about recommending a sleep app rather than medicine. And of course, I don't know if you heard about this yesterday, doctors in hospitals are advocating that they work from home. You know, you wake up after your operation, there's a computer and they talk to you through the Zoom. How are you feeling this morning, Mr. Kyle? Unbelievable. Your response on both of those things.
So, on the first story, I think this is a really interesting story, actually. So, it's about an app called Sleepio, which the NHS wants to roll out to 8,000 sufferers, I believe it's of insomnia or have sleep issues. And this app is set to cost the NHS per patient only £45, which is a lot cheaper than the medical interventions like Zopiclone, for example, which is quite a serious drug which can give people addiction problems. But one thing which is quite interesting, it says in the Times that it's 75% effective, but 75% effective at giving people 30 minutes extra sleep a night. I'm not sure about you, Jeremy, but I think I would like longer than 30 minutes extra sleep a night if I was spending, a couple of hours a week on this app for 6 weeks. Trying to get better sleep.
If you talk about how the world's changed, even medicine, it's all computerised and maps. What did you make of the doctors, the consultants who want to work from home? You know, like people in hospital, you want to see your doctor and make sure you're all right. I mean, what happened to bedside manner then? I am, Albie, turning into my dad on television every single day. The world's gone nuts. Doesn't that just say that we need more doctors in hospitals? Isn't that what we should be doing?
We definitely need to get back to the tradition of NHS service that we had in this country that predated the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, there are some medical services which can be delivered just as effectively through digital channels as in through physical channels. But I think if after an operation you want to have that sense of familiarity with your consultant, that everything's all right, that they can tell you how the operation has gone. I know when I had an operation just before the pandemic, it was good to see the consultant both before and after the operation. I
mean, I take your point, but I would say that there were massive problems with the NHS. There have been for years. 4.5 million people were waiting for operations and appointments, I think, before the pandemic. 6.5 million now. I make no secret of the fact that I think the NHS is one of the greatest inventions in the modern world. I think it's a money pit. I think it's a disgrace the way it's run. I actually think there's too many computers, too many tech people. I think there's too many brainstorming sessions and not enough doctors and nurses. To me, it's really simple, and I think it's also not about pouring money. It's about streamlining it and also giving it to the people who've paid into it instead of a system that has so many loopholes that it's taken advantage of. But that's me on my soapbox. But yeah, doctors, you have an operation. How are you, Mavis? he's somewhere else down. It doesn't. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't seem to work. I'm all for saving money, but it doesn't seem to work. This interested you, I know. The Queen overnight announcing 8 new cities, part of the Platinum Jubilee celebration.
Yes, part of the Platinum Jubilee celebration. So she's announced 8 new cities across the United Kingdom, but also in the Falklands Islands, which I think is actually the most exciting part of this story. So Stanley in the Falklands Islands is being given city status. Many of the viewers and listeners might not have heard about Stanley, but actually what I think is really special about the story is what happened 40 years ago. It was the end of the Falklands War. So I think it's not only a commemoration of the Queen's Jubilee, it's also a commemoration of the end of the Falklands War, the last war to be fought on British soil. And it's a really special time when towns get city status. We recently
What does it mean?
Southend.
What does it mean? I know Southend, after the tragic murder of Sir David Amis, he'd advocated and wanted Southend to be a city for a long time, and that, I think, out of his memory, was awarded. So
Yes.
what does a city? What does that mean? I thought a city had a cathedral.
Yes, historically cities only had a cathedral. So the smallest city in the country is actually St David's in Wales, which is kind of like a village with a massive cathedral in it. But the definition has changed a bit since then, and now the Queen can just give city status. And she does it for celebrations, and it happens on, you know, special or tragic occasions, like we saw with Sir David Amis's tragic murder. But it's really more something for the people of that place, and it's something that gives them pride, a little bit of an economic boost. It might attract more tourism, for example. So these little commemorations, they're important for people.
I'm not being cynical. I don't want you to leave here this morning and think that I'm cynical, but Milton Keynes has been given city status, and you've just said to me that one of the things is tourism. Would you go to Milton Keynes as a tourist? I wouldn't.
Well, as a bit of an economics geek, I went to Milton Keynes because, of course, it was a new town. I can't remember, it was opened at some point in the 20th century. And it's also named after a famous economist, John Maynard Keynes. So for me, I did go to Milton Keynes as a tourist, but I appreciate if not everyone will. Lots of roundabouts, so maybe not exciting for everyone.
Isn't it sad that people actually say that? Lots of roundabouts. But so, that's really good, and she's done that. And I must say as well about the Queen, really interesting to see. There was so much written about she wouldn't be at these things. She seems to be turning up on her own terms, which is fantastic. I will never forget seeing her try to make an Oyster card work the other day on the Elizabeth line. I was just saying, why are you getting the Queen to buy an Oyster card? Can't you put 70 years she's been on the throne, give her a free ticket? Outrageous.
I think actually she did actually buy a ticket when the Victoria line opened back in the 60s. So I think it's a similar thing going on with the Elizabeth line, and it's just so wonderful to see her actually be able to make it out to that new tube line opening, which of course is named after Her Majesty the Queen.
Final one, and I think this is a really unedifying thing that seems to have started. Pitch invasions. We saw some horrific visions last night. We'll get that up if you can, Dave, for a minute, but football playoffs, there's been pitch invasions. We had the story at the weekend, the Sheffield United-Nottingham Forest game, a player knocked to the ground bleeding, and somebody's been put in jail for 24 weeks instantly. Last night, Everton-Crystal Palace. Everton score in the last minute, survive in the Premier League. They all come on. And then you see the Crystal Palace manager, look, you can see it on screen there, being taunted, turns around, whacks the bloke and then kicks him. You can't do... you know, you think back to Hillsborough, you think back to everything on a serious note that happened with football and fans, and you think about where we are. Pitch invasions have to... This has to stop. It's going to result in a death, isn't it?
It's totally unacceptable. And actually, what I've been reading is that fan behaviour has been a lot worse since the Euro 2020 final last year. And so they think that might have been a catalyst for this change in behaviour from a minority of fans. Let's not forget the majority of fans are having a wonderful time with their families, with their friends, cheering on, enjoying football, you know, live, in person.
But they're now throwing flares and attacking players, and managers are attacking fans. That's taking us back to the horror where England was thrown out almost of every football tournament because of the appalling reputation of its fans. Football's one of those games that binds this country together, I think, in a fantastic way. I think we have to crack down on it massively.
We absolutely have to crack down on antisocial behaviour. And actually last week, the government said they wanted to crack down on people using cocaine at football matches because they thought that was a factor in why people were being more violent and antagonistic.
Is this the idea where they take your passport away?
Yes.
But what? sorry, this is another thing. So if you're caught with cocaine at a football match, you have your passport taken away.
I think that was more in relation to when football teams or the England football team would be playing abroad, so you wouldn't be able to go and see that game away abroad in another country and cause trouble somewhere else. But I think for most people, if you were going to get punished for casual cocaine use, they would stop using it. I think the problem when it comes to a lot of drug policy now, we say it's illegal, but is it actually illegal? People use it with impunity at football matches and nothing happens. I think if people actually had their passports taken away from them, then they might stop.
Can I just sum up, because we are heading to the news, and Albie, it's been an absolute pleasure. So what we've learnt this morning, or yesterday so far, is that we have a senior policeman who says that you can shoplift and get away with it, and the police have also suggested that if you take cocaine at football matches, we're not going to prosecute you, we'll just take your passport away. I think the world's gone barking mad.
I think we definitely do, if we are going to criminalise things, actually criminalise things properly. If we want to argue for liberalising drug laws, that's a separate argument. I'm very happy to have that discussion. But at the moment, the law that is in place is that these things are illegal, and therefore they should be cracked down upon.
Completely agree. Albie, thank you so much indeed. Always a pleasure. Peter, who, that's the way it is. If you're missing Cardi P, he's not been well. He will be back next week. But Albie Amankona, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Quick